Massive Entertainment's much-touted open-world Star Wars game is finally upon us, and it probably hasn't landed exactly the way that many would have hoped it would. Certainly, there is a lot to like about Star Wars Outlaws and the scoundrel fantasy that it concocts, but at nearly every turn, the spacefaring adventure is weighed down and held back by significant issues. Here, that's exactly what we're going to discuss as we go over some of the things that we liked the most about Star Wars Outlaws and some of the things that we weren't so crazy about. Liked. Feeling like a scoundrel.
Just don't back down.
What if I say no?
Now that you know who I work for, I can't let you walk out of here.
Okay, Manda. You got a deal.
And you've got a job to finish.
Star Wars Outlaws' biggest selling point was always supposed to be its promise of letting you live out your greatest Star Wars scoundrel fantasies, and thankfully, this at the very least is an area where the game is a resounding success. Getting to feel like a slick, smooth-talking, double-crossing interstellar criminal in the Star Wars universe feels exactly as good as it should. The game accomplishes that in a number of different ways, from giving players the tools to improvise on the fly when things start turning sour, Han Solo style, to navigating the galaxy's criminal underworld as it tries to keep the many different factions happy, or at least not totally livid at the very idea of your existence. That instantly brings us to our next point. The reputation system.
All right, Boss Knock. Wipe all the peg debts you have on record.
Someone wants to get Gork in trouble, huh? Brave, sure. Stupid, maybe. I'll wipe them and meet you in my extraction cruiser.
The reputation system is the heart and soul of Star Wars Outlaws, being tied to pretty much every single major system or mechanic in the game. There's an argument to be made that perhaps it isn't quite as fleshed out as it could have been, but there can't be any denying that it does an excellent job of helping bring the game's scoundrel fantasy to life. Too often, we've seen the outlaw character trope in Star Wars deftly working with and against different criminal factions to further their own goals, and the reputation system here definitely succeeds in emulating that. On top of that, the choices that you make often require genuine thought, and the gameplay consequences actually do feel legitimately impactful. The Star Wars aesthetic. This one should be an easy win for any Star Wars game. The beloved sci-fi IP has been a pop culture behemoth for as long as it's existed, and has developed a very particular visual and aesthetic identity over time, the kind that, if you do like it, you probably cannot get enough of it.
That's fun. Hang on.
We certainly count ourselves in that group, so we're more than happy with how well Star Wars Outlaws captures that aesthetic. From the slick and claustrophobic interiors of Imperial bases and space stations to the instantly recognizable sound effects of speeders and blasters. From how densely packed and brimming with incredible detail pretty much every single location you visit to the gorgeous vistas that you can see throughout the galaxy. Massive Entertainment clearly understood the assignment in terms of capturing that classic Star Wars look and feel. The open world design. You'd be forgiven for having at least some skepticism over Star Wars Outlaws' open world design. Though Massive Entertainment itself has crafted plenty of excellent open world maps in its time, Ubisoft as a publisher has become associated with some of the most fatigue-inducing open world tropes around. Thankfully, Star Wars Outlaws feels like a fresh take-up in that regard. Far from feeling too formulaic or rigidly structured, the map here is surprisingly organic, with an actual sense of discovery defining the experience. Being naturally distracted by things that pique your curiosity rather than following markers and checklists definitely makes for a much more compelling open-world gameplay. Kay and Nyx.
You must be Slero.
Your friends abandoned you.
Friends. What friends?
How long have you been part of the Rebel Alliance?
Oh, you're serious?
What do the rebels want with Zarek Besh?
Listen, I don't know any rebels, but I know people. Let me go. I get answers. We solve this together.
You're gonna have to do better than that.
Star Wars Outlaws writing has its issues, and more on that in a bit, which means there are plenty of characters in its cast that don't get the time in the sun that they need. But thankfully, the leading pair, Kay and Nix, is great right off the bat. Kay is no Han Solo or Lando Calrissian in that she lacks experience and frequently makes naive mistakes, but her ability to adapt and improvise turn her into a capable leading woman nonetheless. That, combined with her endearing attitude and, of course, her unbreakable bond with the adorable Nix, make her and her little companion incredibly easy to get invested in. Disliked. Inconsistent writing. Let's kick this section off with Star Wars Outlaws' writing deficiencies, since we've already touched on them, and to be fair, it's not like the writing in this game is terrible across the board. As mentioned, Kay is a great protagonist, as her bond with Nix is another bright spot. But often, the game is let down by nonsensical contrivances, leaps in logic, inconsistencies, characters being needlessly stupid, and more. This is also a game that clearly didn't get the show don't tell memo, because of which some of the biggest narrative developments in the latter stages end up falling almost completely flat. Insta-fail stealth sections.
Yep, all clear. Stop that. Finally!
Fine.
I have no idea how we're talking about insta-fail sections in a major new AAA release in 2024. Even a decade ago, this would have been called incredibly dated by design, and Star Wars Outlaws not only adopts it, but then also proceeds to double down on it. There's a frustrating amount of forced stealth sections in the game, which are made worse by the fact that thanks to rough AI issues, technical glitches, and half-baked stealth mechanics, the stealth gameplay in this game just isn't very good. We're huge fans of the stealth genre here, but there are few things worse than a game that hard-headedly emphasizes stealth gameplay even though it simply isn't equipped to do so. Stiff movement. This is the one problem you usually don't expect to find in games by Massive, which almost always feel excellent to play in terms of their moment-to-moment gameplay and game feel. Weirdly enough, the same definitely cannot be said about Star Wars Outlaws. The general movement in the game feels just incredibly clunky, and though a lot of that is obviously down to the game's many technical issues, which we'll get to shortly, even absent of those, the game just feels clunky and cumbersome to control on a very fundamental level.
I want to go. Over here. After her.
You want to live through this, you'll get that thing open.
It's not my fault. I told you she wasn't ready.
Just figure it out.
Bland climbing mechanics. The list of AAA tropes that Star Wars Outlaws employs is a long one, with Uncharted-style climbing mechanics being high on that list. Sadly, the climbing doesn't feel nearly as smooth or as fun as it does in the Uncharted games, with Kay's movement feeling incredibly janky and stiff. As you're clambering over walls and ledges, you can almost physically feel the seams between one animation and the next. There's also the fact that climbing sections almost always end up being incredibly straightforward and linear, to the point where they end up feeling like the most low-stakes strings of QTEs imaginable. Technical issues. Unfortunately, technical issues at launch are not all that uncommon in AAA games. Hell, last year's Star Wars Jedi Survivor had similar issues as well. Outlaws, however, feels particularly rough around the edges. In our time with the game, we've been hit with performance drops, muddy draw distances, lip-syncing issues, texture pop-in, animation glitches, and all sorts of bugs. Given the fact that the game went gold almost 2 whole months before release, we're kinda surprised to see it coming in this hot. And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at GamingBolt, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.